I grew up in Lewistown, so just over the mountain. I ended up starting out my teaching career in Owensboro, Kentucky. And in that first year, I also met my future husband, Steve. And on the day that the president was shot, I received my first ever pink slip, and Steve proposed, all on the same day. Steve's background story is a little different. He was a student at UK, University of Kentucky, studying geology. And this is in the early 70s. The draft had just been instituted. And he had a very low draft number. So he dropped out of the University of Kentucky, joined the Army. When Steve got out of the Army, he went back to the University of Kentucky to finish up his geology degree. About 2 weeks before the end of the class, they were coming back from being out doing whatever geology students do out in the field. And the driver of the van lost control. His world changed with that head injury. And he had to basically learn everything once again. One of the things that he used in his relearning of everything from numbers to colors to all those basic types things were his stamps. He had started collecting stamps as a child, and he loved it. It was his thing. His mom used his stamps as part of their home therapy program to get Steve to, not just understand, stamp collectors know the difference between blue and green, but they also have a whole lot of different shades of blue and a whole lot of different shades of green and all the shades of red and all the shades of yellow. And that was part of his therapy program. He relearned geography through his stamps. He relearned the numbers, and that numbers had value. And, he relearned how to research things by researching all the stamps through the Scott catalogs. He used his stamps to rebuild his life. Stamps for him went beyond the collecting. It went into the story of the stamp. It went into the people he met because of stamps. He was actively involved in 2 different stamp clubs, one in Owensboro and one over in Evansville, Indiana. He had been a member of APS for 30 some years. Really enjoyed it. And one day he told me about summer seminar and that he'd really like to do that. I would bring Steve down here in the morning, go do whatever I wanted during the day and most of the evening. He loved coming up for stamp camp. He would always look at me when I would call it stamp camp. He'd go, "It's summer seminar." And I'm like, "All right, summer seminar." But he would come up for volunteer week at times. We would come up to visit family around Christmas, and Steve would come over the next morning, go through, the stamps and the pre-circuits and all that, and I'd pick him up and we'd go home. And he's like, "I have always wanted to go to one of those celebrations where they bring out a new stamp." And I'm like, I just took what he was saying and I filed it away, and I looked up the date and I cleared the calendar for the weekend. And on Thursday, I said, "What are you doing this weekend?" And he said, "Nothing." I said, "Good. Pack an overnight bag. Where are we going?" "You'll find out." So I put him in the car and we drove up to my sister's, spent the night with her. And Steve's like, well, this was an interesting trip. I said, but we're going to go meet some friends for breakfast tomorrow and then we'll head home. Okay. We had breakfast and I drove over to APS and he's like, why are we here? I said, today's the day for the Fred Rogers stamp. He was a kid in the candy store at Christmas. He thought it was absolutely the most magical thing he had ever done. And I had to agree with him. It was an absolutely perfect day. Mr. McFeely made a speedy delivery and brought the stamp in. Steve was thrilled. He got 2 panes of the stamps, chose a first day cover to send a letter home, and I wrote out the letter to him about being there that day, and he didn't get to see the letter until it arrived back in Owensboro. He had the best time getting to do that, and he had went home and he's like telling all of his stamp buddies, he kept begging his friends to come to APS. Steve's collection was an extremely disorganized jumble of stamps from everywhere. He had an entire room of our house, floor to ceiling. And we had talked about that a few times. And I would ask him, Steve, what do you want me to do with your stamps on the odd occurrence that you go before me? And he would go, I don't know. And I would go, okay. I think an amazing bonfire would be lovely. Don't you dare. And I went, I won't. But please tell me what to do. Call APS. And I said, okay. What are they going to do? I don't know, but they'll have the answer. It's been tough. And one of the days I was driving up here to deal with some other things and wanted to talk with someone about what do I do with my husband's stamp collection. I wonder if there's something I could do at APS in Steve's memory and honor for his love of stamps. I met Scott English that day. What are you thinking of financially? And I went, I don't know. But I can tell you this much, it's more than like a brick in a garden somewhere or on a wall. Or he's like, okay. He said, let's keep talking. And we kept talking. And he gave me a couple ideas that day. And I went back home and I mulled them over for a while. And I went and I talked with the Owensboro Stamp Club. And I said, here are 2 things that I'm looking at maybe doing with APS. And I just want your input. You guys knew Steve as a stamp collector. Which idea do you think he would prefer? There was some general discussion, and one of them said, it's easy. And I'm like, great, I don't think it's an easy choice. And they said, we probably need to tell you something about our time with Steve. I went, okay. And they said, Steve didn't talk a lot. He rarely even talked about his stamps with us. We knew he loved them, but that was not what he talked about. Every time, whether it was a board meeting at somebody's house or at our general stamp meeting, Steve always told us stories about what you were doing in the classroom or in the Czech Republic, or what you 2 were planning for the next English camp, or what you had just done at English camp. He said he was so proud of what you did in education. Steve was also an educator. The day of Steve's accident was one of the nurses said, introduced herself, and she said, "I'm sorry, but was he a teacher?" And I'm like, no. But he did substitute. And she said, "For Owensboro?" And I said, "Uh-huh." And she turned around to the other nurse in the room and she slapped her on the arm and said, "I told you I knew him." And she turned back to me and she's like, "He was the best substitute I ever had." This young lady had graduated over 20 years ago. Most kids can't tell you the name of a substitute, let alone, unless it's one that they picked on. And she is going on and she's like, whenever my friends and I saw him in the hallway, if we saw him in the hallway first thing in the morning, we knew it was going to be a great day at OHS, and we just hoped he was in for one of our teachers. Because he was the kindest, the most intelligent, the most incredible teacher we ever met. And that gave me a different insight into Steve that day. One that I had not seen. And then when this Owensboro Stamp Club said, whatever project you choose with APS, it has to be something with a very strong educational component to it, because that's what Steve would want, because it would honor both of you. So that's why I'm here. I'm honoring the educator that Steve had been. I'm honoring the education part of my life that he absolutely was so proud of. And I'm able to do that through honoring Steve's love of stamps, and that all that the stamps meant to him in his rehabilitation, in his connection with people, in his connection with the world. That's what I want to honor. And Steve left the ability for me to do that. So, yeah, I'm honoring Steve, but I'm really trying to do something to honor what he loved. That's why I'm here.